Welcome to Doppelnamers, where we connect the dots between people who share the same name. My name is Elizabeth Russell, and this is the story of my doppelnamer, a pioneer named Elizabeth Russell, who was tried for murder in Eau Claire, Wisconsin in 1892. At the time, it was the most famous murder trial in Wisconsin's history. With me are my good friends Mary Jean Stead and Kathy Boyle Almeida. Neither MJ nor Cath knows anything about the story. They will be meeting the characters and hearing the facts right along with the listeners. In our last episode, we met pioneers William Carson, Thomas Russell, and the Horton family, Lathrop, Sana, and their daughter Elizabeth. They traveled different roads, but all converged at Eau Claire, Wisconsin. In this episode, Thomas Russell and Elizabeth Horton have married, and we get a flavor of what life was like in 1890s Eau Claire. We'll meet two immigrant families, the Jensens and the Ericksons, who figure very importantly in Elizabeth's story. And we'll conclude the episode with a side of Elizabeth nobody saw coming. By 1850, Lathrop and Sana Horton had settled in as farmers in Dodge County, Wisconsin, which is in the eastern part of the state. Mm-hmm. When we saw them next on a census in 1870, they'd moved to the western part of the state, to Eau Claire, and their daughter Elizabeth, at age 29, was still living with them.
Right. We talked about her not being married. That was unusual.
Exactly. Both of you made that comment that at 29, that seemed old for a woman of those times to be living at home and not married. Well, it turns out that back in Dodge County, when she was around 19 or 20, Elizabeth had fallen into a forbidden love. His name was Edward Cole, and he was a farm laborer of about her same age, and he was an immigrant from Canada. But for some reason, Lathrop and Sana forbade Elizabeth from marrying him. Why? No idea. From court records, it seems that Elizabeth was heard saying she was ready to run off and marry Edward Cole anyway. But remember what year this was likely to have been. It was probably around 1861.
Okay, so...
Right. So the Civil War started and Edward went to war. Edward Cole served in Company I of the 29th Wisconsin Infantry, and unfortunately, he died in service.
Oh, no.
Now, he wasn't shot or injured. Edward died from dysentery, which, according to an author of the time, was more fatal to soldiers than powder and shot.
Oh, boy.
The cause of death listed on his official record is chronic diarrhea, because the terms diarrhea and dysentery were used interchangeably.
Bad way to go.
Not something you want your family to find years later.
The commentators today point out that dysentery is the disease, diarrhea is the symptom. It doesn't matter, because either way, get this, it killed 95,000 Union soldiers during the Civil War, including Edward Cole. I just read that of the 2 million Union Army soldiers, 1,900,000 reported having this disease, which is like almost everybody.
Wow.
So that was like the biggest killer of soldiers.
Wow.
But anyway, the whole thing gives us a little background about why Elizabeth wasn't married. She had a broken heart.
Yeah.
Two things I wonder is first, why Lathrop and Sana did not approve of Edward Cole? And then why did they pick up farming from the eastern side of the state and move to the western side of the state at about that same time? So that's a little background on why Elizabeth wasn't married. When a person investigates the history of Eau Claire in the late 1800s, there's one book that always pops up. It's a book called The Rivers Flow On by a woman named Lois Barland. Now, I think Lois Barland was a hobbyist local history buff. She just collected tons and tons of information. I have her book, and I'm looking at it. And I have to assume that it contains information that's accurate and information that is not accurate. But her book does give us a really colorful flavor of what life was like during the time of Elizabeth Russell's trial, which was in 1892. So here's some excerpts, according to Lois Barland. The period was indeed the gay 90s. In fact, in Eau Claire, it was so gay as to be more honestly dubbed the corrupt 90s. In 1893, there were 90 saloons in the city. There were various kinds of corruption, including graft and embezzlement, places delicately referred to as houses of ill fame, and there must also have been considerable use of narcotics, because in addition to a hospital for the cure of alcoholism, there was a cure for dope addiction.
Wow.
Barland offers some really wild anecdotes. One involves another one of my doppelnamers, Mrs. E.R. Russell, who by coincidence was subpoenaed to give testimony in our Elizabeth Russell's trial. And I don't see that she ever did, but maybe this is why. Listen to this one. Mrs. E.R. Russell, with other ladies, was walking home from the Lake Street Methodist Church missionary meeting, and at the corner of Wilson Park met cattle being brought from William Swift's farm in Brunswick by Frank Dick. Mrs. Russell was gored by the bull.
Oh, gosh.
And Mrs. Heimbo and Mr. Dick were tossed and stamped upon. Mr. Dick finally beat off the bull with a club.
Oh, no.
It's a bad day.
Terrible.
Here's some more snapshots of the times, according to Lois Barland. Will Feig, son of Conrad Feig, cigar maker, shot his girlfriend, Anna Lenz, in the head, and then shot himself while he was drunk. Neither was dangerously hurt.
Oh, they didn't die.
Will was sent to reform school.
What kind of gun was this? Neither were hurt.
Yeah, these were bad times.
Mrs. Sam Kenyon, while drunk, got in the Honorable W.P. Bartlett's buggy and drove down State Street Hill onto Barstow Street. Bartlett followed in another buggy and caught up at the Presbyterian Church. Mrs. Kenyon hit Mr. Bartlett with the buggy whip, but he finally got his buggy and went home. Mr. Kenyon had come home from Augusta after several days' absence and found his wife and another woman drunk. He took his mother and his children to get admitted to the children's home.
Oh, wow.
While his mother was there, Mrs. Kenyon went to the senior Mrs. Kenyon's home and broke all 43 windows, was arrested and taken to jail. In jail, she tore her skirt to pieces and tried to hang herself.
Oh.
2 months later, Mrs. Kenyon took a room at a hotel to take the liquor cure, admitted a man to her room after 11 p.m., and both were arrested. The trial was set for a near date, but Mrs. Kenyon left town. These are colorful anecdotes, but what some of them have just told us is that alcoholism and substance abuse were pretty big drivers back then.
Yeah.
Just like they are today.
What was the year again?
The trial was 1892, and this was all roughly around that time.
Wow.
And I just had to look up because Coca-Cola, if you remember, had cocaine in it.
Right.
So I'm thinking like if people are drinking Coca-Cola and narcotics and drinking, I'm like, it could have been like a really crazy time.
Yeah, really.
Well, to a different part of life back then, banking. Banking, it's not a big part of our story, but this is from Barland's book is also kind of interesting. The Eau Claire National Bank, founded in 1861 as a private bank and chartered as a national bank in 1882, is the only one operating under the national banking law. That doesn't sound super interesting, but it actually made me wonder about what makes a national bank and what is the national banking law. So I found this from the U.S. Senate website. Designed to replace the corrupt, decentralized, and inefficient system of state banks and banknotes, the National Bank Act of 1863 had 3 objectives: to create a market for war bonds, makes sense,
right,
to reestablish the central banking system destroyed during President Andrew Jackson's administration, who knew, and to develop a stable banknote currency. With modifications, this system remained the backbone of the nation's monetary structure until creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913. And still, you might be saying, okay, so what? But guess who was vice president of the Eau Claire National Bank?
Was it her husband?
No.
Father?
It was William Carson.
Oh.
The lumber baron.
Wow.
Okay. And
he's everywhere.
So he wasn't just in lumber. He was a bank guy as well. And this will actually matter later in our story. A charge was made in 1892, again, that's the year of the trial, that the county sheriff had been taking the $2 per day, which was supposed to have been for an extra jailer, and pocketed the money. The county board investigated and brought suit to recover nearly $7,000 in interest over a period extending back 9 years. Now, Lois Barland doesn't mention the sheriff's name, but I will. His name was John H. Fleming. He and the jail are going to be center stage in Elizabeth's story. So right off the bat, here it is. You can count on at least one corrupt official. Let's switch tracks for a sec and start talking about immigration and meet some more of the characters in our story. So Wisconsin became a state in 1848, and one of the requirements for statehood was a population of at least 60,000. My question when I read that was, who got counted?
Oh, right.
Any ideas?
I don't know.
Landowners.
I found the answer in Article 5 of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The answer is free male inhabitants of full age.
Oh, okay.
In other words, adult white men.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my next question to myself was, did the indigenous peoples get counted?
And no women.
Definitely no women.
Yeah.
God forbid the women.
Just they're not there.
So I got my answer then from the Northwest Ordinance, but I kept reading it a little bit, and it has another interesting point. Listen to this part. Schools and means of education shall forever be encouraged. Okay, good. Wish that was still the case. The utmost good faith shall always be observed toward the Indians. Their lands and property shall never be taken from them without their consent.
Oh boy.
And in their property, rights, and liberty, they shall never be invaded or disturbed.
Who wrote that?
Yeah.
This was like the statement of the U.S. government.
Wow.
And then it goes on, and there's a couple more sentences, and then it's almost like we've got our fingers crossed behind our back, because the next part of it says, unless...
Yeah, I was going to say, haven't we taken our land already?
Unless in just and lawful wars authorized by Congress.
Okay, unless we just decide to take it.
So I only mention that because we're talking about all this pioneering and the pioneers coming from here. And I think we just have to acknowledge that all these indigenous atrocities really are the backdrop of the pioneer stories.
Definitely. So they didn't require U.S. citizenship to be counted?
I don't know the answer to that, but it would appear not. The answer was just free male inhabitants of full age.
Could have been a lot of Canadians counted.
That's a good point. Come on down and be an inhabitant just while we need to get our numbers up. As Cath's pointing out, we don't know exactly where they came from, but when Wisconsin did become a state in 1848, they exceeded the 60,000 limit because they had 200,000. But even that was not enough to undertake the complete exploitation that Wisconsin's white government aspired to. Initially, Wisconsin actually tried to attract European immigrants. In 1852, Wisconsin created something called the Office of State Commissioner for Immigration, which had its office in New York City. The idea was to meet immigrants as soon as they got off the boat, tell them how great Wisconsin was, tell them how to get here. Come on out.
Come on over.
Wow.
So, like I just said, that was 1852. This lasted for how long do you think?
I don't know.
Early 1900s?
It lasted for 3 years.
Only, wow.
There were immediate attempts to abolish this. And by 1855, they prevailed. It was all done. So according to this University of Wisconsin publication, both Republicans and Democrats harbored nativist ideas at the time. Some of them even had adopted the Know Nothing movement, which called for the exclusion of all foreigners and Catholics from public office.
And Catholics.
This actually brings up another point. Since practically everyone in Wisconsin, other than the indigenous, came from somewhere else, there was an immediate divide between those who came from the eastern United States, who were called the Yankees, versus those arriving directly from Europe, who were called the immigrants. To me, this is almost hilarious because most of the Yankees were children of immigrants.
True.
But still, the divide was huge. Yankees were good, immigrants were less than. In our story, we'll meet an Eau Claire doctor, a Yankee named Ralph Rollin Chase, who was born in New York and graduated from Genesee College in 1882. My New York friends, what school do you think Genesee College became?
Geneseo. Wrong.
That's what I thought too. It became
Was it-
Syracuse University.
Oh, interesting.
Huh. Wasn't it? I was thinking Genesee cream ale.
So Dr. Chase, oh man, Dr. Chase came from a long line of medical doctors. He was extremely prominent in Eau Claire. At one point in the Elizabeth Russell trial, though, he's quoted as saying about an immigrant who'd had an injury, "I'd have thrown that Norwegian down the stairs myself."
Oof.
Yeah, anti-immigrant sentiment is a factor in Wisconsin right from the start. So far, we've met a bunch of Yankees. Now, I wish they were called the Mets, but anyway.
Your true love.
Here are immigrant characters. John Jensen was born in what today is Germany's northernmost state called Schleswig-Holstein.
Oh, I'm not going to remember that one.
You don't need
No.
to. You might want to remember John Jensen, though. So Schleswig-Holstein, it borders Denmark and lies between the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. It's about as close as you can get to being Scandinavia, but not. John Jensen was born in 1837 and immigrated to Wisconsin in 1857 when he was 20 years old. In Wisconsin, he married a girl who had also emigrated from the same region in Germany. I can't tell if they knew each other back there or not, but anyway, here in Wisconsin, on April 22nd, 1866, John Jensen married Margaret Pepgratz, and you can just call her Maggie.
Thank you.
Because that's what most people called her. So John and Maggie then settled in Buffalo County, Wisconsin, which is about 30 miles southwest of Eau Claire. It's along the Mississippi River. Now, if you're wondering what John did between arriving in Wisconsin in 1857 and finally marrying Maggie in 1866, the answer is
Lumber.
he fought for the Union in the Civil War.
Oh, wow.
John, the recent immigrant, was mustered into service on July 16th, 1861 for a term of 3 years. He served in the Army of the Potomac and received wounds at Gettysburg and at Spotsylvania. John was discharged from service in 1864, but then he re-enlisted. So this immigrant with no ties to the United States really gave his all as a soldier.
Wow.
Certainly did. Were there incentives to join the war? Like land or anything like that? He re-enlisted, right?
Yeah, he re-enlisted voluntarily.
I can't imagine that you'd want to, once you were finally out, willingly want to go back. All right. So John Jensen, good man. Or maybe not. We'll find out.
I don't know. Maybe he just didn't want to get married. He re-enlisted in 1864. And then in 1866, Maggie came over. And that's when they got married. So that tells me that maybe they did know each other. And they were just waiting to see if John would survive the war.
That makes sense.
But anyway, he did. And she did. And they got married. And they started farming in Wisconsin. And as farmers do, they had 10 kids. So
Gotta work the fields.
that's the Jensens.
Okay.
Now, not long after John and Maggie got married, another family immigrated to Wisconsin and settled nearby. This was the Erickson family from Sweden. Dad's name was Petter Eriksson, Peter, and mom was Katja Brynoldsson. At the time of their immigration in 1870, they already had 2 boys named Edwin and Peter, and then they had 3 more kids once they got to Wisconsin, Adam, Betsy, and Albert. The Ericksons were farmers, just like the Jensens, and although I can't pinpoint exactly where their farms were, it's clear that the kids from these 2 families knew each other. In fact, as teenagers, Bertha Jensen and Adam Erickson were dating. Now that's an important piece of information, so I'll say it again.
Bertha and Adam.
Bertha Jensen and Adam Erickson were dating.
Okay.
So tuck that away. Meanwhile, what's going on with Thomas and Elizabeth Russell? Elizabeth's mother, Sana, had passed away in 1879. And after that, Thomas and Elizabeth's father, Lathrop Horton, all lived together. Sometimes they were in their house in town, Eau Claire, and sometimes they were at Thomas and Elizabeth's farm, which wasn't too far away. Remember, though, Thomas was never there because he was always away at the logging camps. So to keep the farm running, Elizabeth employed the Erickson brothers, Adam and Peter. And just as a reminder, Adam Erickson was dating Bertha Jensen.
How old is Elizabeth compared to Adam and?
That's a great
Okay.
question. And the answer is she's roughly 20 years older than they are.
Oh, okay.
That's
All right.
a really great question because it's going to
Mhm,
matter.
Oh, all right. I need to picture these people in my brain.
Yeah, I know, me too.
We don't know where her farm, Elizabeth's farm, is in relation to the other two farms, do we?
No, but they're all,
In the same town?
no,
Oh.
they're in other outlying areas. I would guess all within maybe 30 miles or so of Eau Claire.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, close enough for the Erickson brothers to work on her farm.
Yes.
All right.
When they went to work on somebody else's farm, though, they lived there. So it's
Okay.
not like they went back and
Oh,
forth
okay.
every day.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
We didn't know the farm etiquette.
And then her husband is away a lot.
Mhm.
Almost all the time.
Oh.
Mm.
One last point before we get into the guts of the story. What industry do you think especially thrived in a location where all the men were away from home working as lumberjacks?
Farming, logging, banking.
Oh.
All right, for this, I'll share another of the excerpts from Lois Barland's book. Mother Foster was found in a shanty on River Street, nearly frozen to death. She was once a noted character in Chippewa Falls. Times are altered since she figured upon our streets. The society of which she formed a part have nearly all gone to that place where the wicked cease from troubling us. Let us pray that their sins may be forgiven.
Oh my.
Prostitution.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Prostitution thrived, not just
Wow.
in the city of Eau Claire, but near the logging camps. But it was
Interesting.
very prevalent within the city.
Wow.
And
Wow.
lots of drinking and narcotics.
Yes.
Interesting.
So
Sin City.
here's something from a University of Wisconsin law school paper titled "This Naughty, Naughty City: Prostitution in Eau Claire from the Frontier to the Progressive Era" by Bonnie Shusha. In her own day, during the last quarter of the 19th century, Ollie Odell was described in a newspaper article as a little woman with an immense quantity of rouge, musk, and flashy jewelry on her person. Also, a red sailor hat tilted to the don't care a damn angle on her head.
I like that.
Ollie was
Vision.
not the kind of person who ordinarily makes it into the history books.
Wow.
She was a prostitute, and past historians would not have deemed her worthy of study.
Wow.
So this author sheds light on what she calls a shadowy corner of American history, noting that women did not enter prostitution because they were naturally depraved, but because society offered women
Not too many options.
few other alternatives.
Right. Wow.
Now, this is interesting because earlier, Kath, I think you said what was the drug of choice?
Oh, yeah.
In 1875, the local paper reported an attempt by a troubled prostitute to commit suicide by ingesting a mixture of chloroform, arsenic, and laudanum.
Oh,
Oh,
wow. It's just laying around like in your house.
It seems to me that there were a lot of substances that today we consider just flat out poisonous
Yeah.
that they just used for other reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to just look up laudanum. It says it's a tincture of opium.
It
Wow.
sounds bad enough on its own, but mix it with chloroform and arsenic, and
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think that's going to end well.
No.
Here's another excerpt. Because they operated outside the law, prostitutes received little police protection. Often, Eau Claire area prostitutes and keepers of brothels had to contend with mobs intent upon wrecking or setting fire to their places of employment.
Oh my gosh.
The weekly Free Press seemed to advocate arson as a means of closing houses of ill fame, and expressed delight in 1866 when it was alleged that, quote, some person with good intent applied a lighted match to Crippen's shebang. The fiery element seemed to be the only thing that could accomplish the good work. Our citizens should rejoice that the evils of this den are thus easily eradicated.
Oh.
So again, this was the Wild West.
Yeah,
Sounds
really.
like it.
And of course, this part. In 1880, when two naughty people were found occupying but one bed where there should have been two, the man was fined $7.15.
Oh boy. And the woman
And the woman,
Jailed.
killed.
$19.15.
Oh, at least it was
so
funny.
bad.
Against all of this backdrop, now let's start to connect our characters. Thomas and Elizabeth, we know, owned a farm, but Thomas was rarely there. So to keep it running, Elizabeth employed Adam and Peter Erickson. Now, I have no reason to believe that Thomas engaged prostitutes. We just don't know. But what we do know is that Elizabeth was not content to stay home as a dutiful, abstinent spouse.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think she did?
Ooh.
Got into business.
How many kids does she have?
Zero.
Kids. Wow.
Zero
okay.
kids.
Okay. So what did she do? I would think prostitution.
She ran the brothel. She's the madam.
Those are great guesses. They're not correct, but
She set them on fire.
another
She
good
was an
guess.
artist.
She helped rid the town of the brothels by setting them aflame.
Oh, that's another good one. Elizabeth put the moves on her young employee, Peter Erickson.
Oh.
And he was 20 years younger.
Yes.
Mm.
She's a cougar.
In our next episode, we'll hear about the encounters between Elizabeth Russell and Peter Erickson in what, for all it's worth, sounds like the 1890s version of #MeToo,
Oh, wow.
with Elizabeth exerting her power as the employer over her younger immigrant employee.
Wow. I wasn't picturing Elizabeth like that.
Yeah. I wonder if she was just still kind of pining for what was her original love's name? Edward.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Scandalous.
That's a
That
good-
is a real cliffhanger, though.
That is a
Even
good cliffhanger. Yeah. I'm picturing her differently now. You know, almost like preying upon young boys.
How young were they when they worked for her?
They
Like-
were maybe 18, 19.
Oh, wow. Not good. I'm surprised she doesn't have children when her mother could have children for 4 decades.
Yeah.
Maybe she didn't really like her husband at all. Maybe she didn't
Maybe
sleep with him.
Thomas was away more than we thought. Yeah.
I would
many
love to
questions.
know how she ended up meeting and marrying Thomas at all.
Yeah.
I wonder if her parents arranged it.
Once I found out about Edward over in Dodge County, and they were dead set against it for I don't know what reason, and then all of a sudden they move. It's like, what's going on there?
Yeah. And he was Canadian. Were Canadians considered immigrants? That's wild.
Yeah. Interesting.
From here on in, everything I'm going to tell you is going to be from trial transcripts.
Okay.
We're done with the background and history part from now on.
We have the scene set and the players.
Yes, and you have met the person who dies.
Oh.
There's a couple other people you haven't met yet, basically lawyers and law enforcement people, but you'll meet them.
When the time comes. Very good. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, me too.
Cool.
Very.
This is really fun, T.S. Thank you for including us.
Yeah.
Next on Doppelnamers, #MeToo, Orville Wright's doppelnamer, and Peeping Elmer? Doppelnamers is a production of Harriet's Guides, LLC. Our theme music was composed and performed by Mary Jean Stead, orchestrated and arranged by Janine Lynn Claps. The Doppelnamers logo was designed by Kay Lum. Thanks to my co-hosts, Mary Jean Stead and Kathy Boyle Almeida. Thanks to the Wisconsin State Law Library, the Wisconsin Historical Society, the archivists at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Take care, Doppelnamers.